does express his own displeasure with the decision to leak the information. He thought it was a bad move. And the president knows he knows it was him. I mean, they know each other just like this. So after his exchange of words with McGeorge Bundy, O'Donnell meets with the president and expresses his own displeasure with the decision to leak the information. And his point is this, and I want you to think about this. What O'Donnell told President Kennedy is there's only one way the world is going to look at that leak. The fact that we're willing to trade our missiles in Turkey for missiles in Cuba. Who are we selling out that live in the vicinity of Turkey? Who are we selling out if we take those missiles out? Well, and they are our allies. He said the only way the world's going to look at this is we're selling out our allies. That we're going to remove those missiles from Turkey, which technically are protecting our allies in that region. Well, it even got a little more personal. Kennedy's father had a reputation of being an appeaser. And you might have heard Dean Acheson in the movie say, you know, I hope appeasement doesn't run in families, because he was really upset at the president for not giving the okay for the airstrikes. Well, Kenneth O'Donnell even got personal with the president. He said, this sounds like something your father would do. It was that effing bad. That's what he told him. And he really kind of, you know, he was a friend of his, but he said, you know, this was stupid. This is something your father would do to appease the Russians. That's how bad of an idea this is. Well, anyway, what are you going to do about it? You going to take back that leak? Once that went out, it ain't coming back. That rumor's going to be out there. Well, at this point in the day, the Security Council of the United Nations was meeting to discuss the events in Cuba. Do you remember where Kennedy wanted support from the Organization of American States and he got a unanimous support? Well, that support from the United Nations is not going to be easy to get, because Cuba and the Soviet Union have some what? Allies, right? And they're not members of the Organization of American States. And so the big thing is this whole issue of how the United States is treating Cuba is going to be discussed at the Security Council of the United Nations. And there are many members of the United Nations around the world at the time that were questioning the United States' position on Cuba. They saw it as Bobby Kennedy thought they would. A big country picking on a small country. Because what aren't they really aware of? They're aware that we accuse them of having missiles, right? But what has the United States not done yet publicly? What? Proved it. They haven't proved it yet. Okay, and then we'll get to that in a minute. So again, many members of the United Nations around the world are questioning the United States' position on the issue of Cuba. And as a result, the United States is going to need to justify to these countries around the world that their actions towards the Soviet Union and Cuba are legitimate. Okay? Because they've only said this, they haven't proved it. Well, what Press Secretary Salinger does is he urges President Kennedy, hey, take those pictures from Commander Ecker's low-level flights and furnish those to UN Ambassador Adlai Stevenson and have him prove to the world what the concern is. That was what Pierre Salinger's suggestion would be. So whose responsibility is it going to be to convince members of the UN Security Council that the United States is justifying what they're doing in Cuba? Who's got to convince them that's right? Adlai Stevenson. Okay? Adlai Stevenson's got to go in there. Well, what do you think of Adlai? Is he a real convincer? I mean, he's a bright man and he's got good suggestions, but is he the type of guy in your mind that's going to go in there and kick ass and take names? Probably not. And many of the Kennedy administration, especially Bobby Kennedy, had serious doubts that Stevenson had what it would take to get UN support for the United States. Because he's got to convince them to look at the photos before they'll look at them. And if he doesn't get to that point, they're not going to show them. Okay, do you see what I'm saying? So you got to make the Russians look bad in order for other members of the UN Security Council to want to see any proof. Does that make sense? Well, the Soviet ambassador that Stevenson would be dealing with was a guy by the name of V.A. Zarin. And he was a hardliner, tough man. And most of the cabinet members or ex-com members were really concerned that Adlai Stevenson had what it took. They thought he was too weak to stand up to V.A. Zorin, because this guy was a hard dude. He was a hard man. Okay, very hardliner, very arrogant, very confident in himself, and many thought Stevenson was too weak to stand up to him in front of the United Nations. What did Bobby Kennedy want to do? Yes, absolutely. He wanted to pull Stevenson out and send somebody else in because he didn't think this guy had what it took. Well, President Kennedy disagreed with his brother. He said, no, but somebody's going to have to go in and give old Adlai Stevenson a pep talk. To say, Adlai, come on, buddy, gotta have it. Who gets that job? Who? No, he wouldn't care much about Marilyn Monroe. Who was going to get that job? Who's got every dirty job? Kenneth O'Donnell. Okay, Kenneth O'Donnell is going to get the job of pulling Stevenson aside and giving him the old pep talk prior to his confrontation with V.A. Zorin at the United Nations. He can't go in there as a wimp. He's got to go in there tough. He's got to go in there and stand toe-to-toe with this Zorin and make Zorin flinch, so to speak, so he can get those pictures out and prove to the world. Well, here's the conversation between O'Donnell and Stevenson on the telephone before Stevenson went into the United Nations. You have to write this down. But O'Donnell says, Adlai, the world has got to know we are right. And if we're going to have a chance at a political solution, we're going to need international pressure. You got to be tough, Adlai. You got to find it, buddy. And Adlai Stevenson replies, I'm an old political cat, Kenny, but I've got one life left. And O'Donnell says, I know you do. And Ambassador Stevenson then went back to the United Nations meeting and aggressively confronted Soviet Ambassador Zorin. So pull out this handout right here, The Brilliance of Adlai Stevenson, and I will give you some break off of taking notes and we'll read through this together. This was the conversation between Stevenson and Zorin at the United Nations Security Council meeting, taking in consideration that they want to slip up on Zorin's part, right? So Zorin starts out because Stevenson actually walks in a little late, okay? Zorin says, we are very glad you could join us, Mr. Stevenson. For the last 2 hours, the entire world is asking only questions. The United States is pushing the entire world to the brink of catastrophe. The people of the world want to know why. We are told again and again about some incontrovertible evidence of offensive weapons to Cuba, but no evidence can be shown to us. Perhaps your spy planes are so secret that you're simply incapable to present such evidence. Perhaps the United States of America is simply mistaken. Huh? Well, the chairman of the UN Security Council, now recognizes the representative from the United States. This is Stevenson's chance to respond and not get ate up by Zorin. Stevenson says, well, let me say something to you, Mr. Ambassador. We do have the evidence. We have it, and it is clear and incontrovertible. And let me say something else. Those weapons must be taken out of Cuba. You, the Soviet Union, have created this new danger, not the United States. Finally, Mr. Zorin, I remind you that the other day, you did not deny the existence of these weapons, but today, again, if I heard you correctly, you now say they do not exist, or that we haven't proved they exist. All right, sir, let me ask you one simple question. Do you, Ambassador Zorin, deny that the USSR has placed and is placing medium and intermediate range missiles and sites in Cuba? Yes or no? Don't wait for the translation. Yes or no? Each of the members had an earpiece in, and as the others spoke in their language, it would translate into their ear. And he asked, don't wait for the translation, yes or no? Zorin then responds, I am not in an American courtroom, sir, and therefore I do not wish to answer a question that is put to me in the fashion in which a prosecutor puts questions. In due course, sir, you will have your answer. He's stalling. This is when they were afraid Stevenson would live with that answer. Stevenson says, you are in the courtroom of world opinion right now, and you can answer yes or no. You have denied that they existed, and I want to know whether I have understood you correctly. Zorin dismisses him. Continue with your statement. You will have your answer in due course. Stevenson responds, which is very unlike Adlai Stevenson. I am prepared to wait for my answer until hell freezes over, if that's your decision. And I am prepared to present the evidence in this room. The Soviet Union has lied to the world. Zorin, knowing that Stevenson's run out of time, because he was given his turn, says, if you have decided not to continue your statement, the chair recognizes the representative from Chile. So Stevenson he's done. He can't present his evidence. Except for the representative from Chile promptly gives his time to Stevenson and the United States. And with that, Stevenson reveals the photographs of the Russian missiles and missile sites in Cuba, and the United States gains the support from the United Nations they so desperately needed. So Adlai kicked butt and took names, and it was kind of an interesting situation. Okay, that's going to end the second part of the Cuban Missile Crisis. We're going to stick the video in and get a little bit of a shot at it, and then you should be working on those sheets that we gave you. And what I'm going to show you today isn't 13 days. I'm going to show you the rest of this period, the actual footage from the real discussion between Zorin and Stevenson at the United Nations. So you can watch this, and then we'll see the dramatized part tomorrow.